In this lesson we will see how we can use the Vray sun and Vray sky for our interiors based on a real example. First of all, we have to understand that we got different times of the day outside and we got different types of interiors. We got interiors with big open windows, but usually most of the times we will use curtains for our windows. We already talked about how we can load our HDRIs in the previous lessons, and now interferes a big question. Our HDRI actually got its own sun. So what we will choose actually for our interiors and for our environment when we create interior design. First of all, we have to understand that the weather outside is different. We will not have always sunny days outside. That's why we will have to learn to adjust the weather outside and the lighting that is coming from our environment. I would like to show how we can manage this question using the sunny day or the sun as our environment lighting. This HDRI that we loaded got its own sky and its own sun. You can see by the shadows as well. Now if we will load our Vray sun and Vray sky like we did in the previous lesson, we will have two suns. So how do we manage that? I would like to show how that works in Vray and impacts our image. First of all, we have to keep in mind that we will have to maintain the HDRI intensity at its default, meaning 1, unless we will start to obtain unrealistic lighting in our scene. For this specific example, I would like to use the environment, not the dome light. When we create interior design, of course, we are focusing mainly on the interior part and interior details. That's why we'll have to combine the artificial lights or the interior lighting with our outside lighting. Of course, we got interiors that got no windows, like bathrooms for example, but we will talk about interiors that have windows. You can see here the final render that I obtained using this camera view, and I would like to explain how I use the lighting from environment usually. In this case, you can see that I've used a more diffuse light outside. By the way, I've used an HDRI. I'll show in the next lesson how we can do this. For now, let's use the Vray sun and Vray sky, as we got curtains and this effect is almost invisible. The main effects or the main focus will be on our interior lights, on our artificial lighting. First of all, in our environment we got no lights. You can see here a few details, but those details belong to our 3D models. Next, I would like to add the sun and the Vray sky. In the next lesson we will see how we can add the HDRI instead of our Vray sky, but for now we will use the Vray sky. Usually we use the top view to create our sun parallel to our earth, and also we are using a 45 degrees angle, somewhere about 45, to create interesting shadows in front of our camera. We will load our Vray sun and Vray sky in the environment. Keep in mind, as we got curtains in this case, we will almost not see this effect. It will be somewhere in the background. Still, we will get the photorealistic light that we need coming from outside to create the filling light inside our interior. So if I will start our render, you can see the same effects that you saw when we started to talk about our sun and our sky. First of all, our lights, our interior lights are shut down. Next, the sun is parallel to our earth and we obtain the minimum amount of light coming from the sun. We will have to change that a bit, and step by step, as we continue to increase the height of our sun towards our earth, the time of the day changes and we are starting to obtain different effects inside our interior. We are starting to obtain those sharp shadows coming from the sun. I'll show in a second how we can change that if you want. If we would have big open windows, we would use the sun and an HDRI, and that would be the most realistic effect that we can get. The next step that we can create for our photorealism is adding a background and exclude that from our sun lighting. I'll show that in the next lesson. We usually use this method when we have big open windows without curtains. Next, let's talk about the filling light that we get from outside. You can see that our render is quite black. Well, we don't have enough light, of course. The first solution that comes in our mind is to increase the sun intensity. Let's try to increase that intensity to 10 and let's see what will happen. Yes, you can see in the render that we are starting to obtain more filling light inside our interior. Well, we didn't add for now the artificial lighting, of course, but we have a problem. We are starting to get overexposed light on our curtains and our background is almost white. Well, in this case, somebody use an exposure layer and then bring the highlight burn lower. Well, actually here starts to interfere the breaking of our photorealism. Although this gives some kind of effect, this is not a good solution for your renders. Let's try to bring our intensity back to 1 and let's see how we can solve that problem. First of all, we know that the intensity of our sun is controlled by the height or the angle towards our Earth. So first of all, for correcting the exposure, we will have to lower a bit our sun. By the way, the shadows, the sharp shadows that you can see here, we can control that by the size multiplier, if you remember. Don't forget to add the invisible option to the sun so you don't see the huge sun. Let's zoom a bit our shadows and let's see what type of shadows we obtain. You can see the soft shadows effect when we increase the size multiplier. Now let's get back to our exposure and let's see how we can correct that. First of all, I would like to enable all the lights that we have, the artificial lights, and I would like to see how all that look together. This is the light lister. It's very useful to control all the lights in your scene. It's especially useful when you have to control the hierarchy or the intensity of all your lights inside your scene, especially when you have interior design and you have a lot of light sources, artificial light sources. Now the position of our sun or the intensity of our sun is still too high as we continue to see that white light on our curtains. One more time, if I'll add that exposure correction layer, you can see that the effect that we are getting from the highlight burn reducing, it's not too realistic. Of course, there are different methods that we can use to adjust that. First of all, that depends also on color mapping. We will talk about that, but when you got curtains and windows, you got at least 2 layers between you and the sun. That's why the most simple way to correct that would be to lower our sun until we get a correct exposure and we can see the details on our curtains. In cases when we got open windows and we don't have curtains, we can use a more intense type of sun, of course, but for now, as we got curtains, we are aiming first to obtain a correct exposure. Next, we are aiming to see the details of our curtains and how they interact with our light. We will stick to a more diffuse type of light outside. As for our clients, the diffuse light that it's coming from outside or the environment light from outside, it's not quite important. For interior design, the main focus will be, of course, the artificial lights. Let me zoom a bit our curtains so you can see how the details interact with our light. We must keep inside our scene some kind of mid-level for our lighting. That's why we will have to stick to a correct exposure. Obtaining too bright highlights or overburns or too dark shadows or too dark areas, it's of course a no for our photorealism in our renders. Of course, we cannot underestimate the feeling light that we got from outside, from our environment. But when creating the interior design, we will have to stick with the priority. In the next lesson, I would like to show how we can use our Vray Sun with the Vray HDRI.